Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of Pavement Matters, brought to you by Pavement Management Services. I'm your host, Lachlan McLean. Now, Pavement Matters is the show where we discuss all things related to pavement engineering, and today we have a very special guest, as is tradition. Today it's Jim Mahood. Now, Jim is an experienced transport, infrastructure maintenance and asset management professional with a passion for optimizing value from assets. And Jim, you've been working for us for, 3 decades in some capacity.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Jim Mahood. I'm a chartered civil engineer and certified practicing asset manager, and I've been involved in road and road associated asset management for the last 35 years. I've worked in the soil stabilisation industry, asphalt and general road maintenance. I'm currently senior asset engineer on a large road asset management contract, and yes, I've had sort of been looking at how we can optimise assets for quite a long time. I've had a lot of exposure and worked a lot with pavement management services over the years, and a lot of the knowledge I have and experience was working closely with Dr. John Yeaman, who was the founder of Pavement Management Services, and John was a great mentor to me in the early years of the original performance specified maintenance contract in Sydney that started in 1995. And John was our principal consultant and basically introduced us to the world of optimised road asset management.
Yeah, no, Dr. John's always got plenty of different stories going on, and in fact we interviewed him only a couple episodes back. If anyone hasn't listened to that, just go back through our history and find that one. But what interests me the most about having you here today, Jim, is that pavement management, we do so much collection for so many different clients, but every one of those clients, they all use the data differently and in different ways. So my first question is, how do you use the data? So how do you assess the condition, use our data to assess the condition and make decisions?
Okay, well, again, contemporary asset management practice is essentially data-driven analysis. We get the data, we analyse it, we use optimisation models to develop tactical works programs, and building a model is quite a complex task. The data's only one part of it, but the data's a very important part of it, and it's understanding, what does the data mean? What's good data? What's bad data? What good looks like on a road? What bad looks like on a road? And it's all depending on the road class, the type of traffic that's using it, the speed, and you basically build a whole series of deterioration equations based on what you want your road to do. So your starting point is, what is the current condition? What is the condition where you think you'll need to intervene to maintain the operability of that road asset, and what is the rate of deterioration, and what do the reset values look like? Reset values are very, very important because they essentially determine the longevity of the treatment that you're proposing, and there's a cost associated with that. So essentially we look at a whole suite of treatments. We'll cost those treatments, we'll feed them into our model, and the model will optimise what is the most appropriate treatment at the appropriate time. And that could mean multiple small, low-level treatments like a road resurfacing over years, as opposed to one large rehabilitation. So we always like to look at the PF curves, the interval between performance and failure, and pick the appropriate time to intervene. Dr. John Yeaman used to always have a graph that looked like a sawtooth roof on a building.
Oh, gosh,
so you have a whole lot of small early interventions that will give you the optimal life of your asset and the best whole of life cost. And it all boils down to whole of life cost. So sometimes difficult to sell that to the money managers in an organisation. If you spend a lot of money now, you can save yourself money in the future. We all know the best performing road is the road that's built properly in the first place. Fortunately, that's not often the case in a diverse road network, particularly sort of networks that we work on in Sydney. We range from high speed, high volume motorways to what are essentially rural roads that grew out of 19th century cattle droving routes. and we have a number of those, and they do take, in some cases, large volumes of traffic. So it's always a juggling act to maintain those sorts of roads. And that's where understanding your network and what you're expecting your network to do, how it's built, and that will then govern how you will treat that road going forward to get the best economic value out of the road. Essentially, pavement optimisation boils down to economic value. And we all know the models that we use basically started in the World Bank as models, the economic models for the World Bank to assess aid programs in third world countries. And people like Dr. Yeaman, Carl Monosmith, Ralph Hass, those sorts of guys, they've developed those models to be the tools we use today to build optimal works programs.
Right. So some of these models must be pretty old, maybe 30 years. If Dr. Yeaman was involved, how have you adapted these models to the modern age, or do you even need to?
Well, the models have evolved over the years. There's certainly at one stage we were doing the World Bank HDM3, which Pavement Management Services modified to your Palms model. There's HDM4. There's the SMEC models. There's DTIMs without sort of advertising any particular software users models. They all can be adapted to what you want them to do. So yes, the models are getting more sophisticated, but they're essentially the same basic thing is to allow you to optimise the condition of your assets to get maximum performance out of minimum cost. So it's sounds simple. The software is very complex, and you quite often, when you're building these models, need a team of people. You need the practitioners who know what good and bad looks like on the road, and obviously data scientists are part of the equation as well that can actually set the models up to give the appropriate outputs.
Okay, so when you're running these models, you put a lot of faith into them because it's essentially the basis of everything you do. So there must be some way to verify how accurate they are. Yeah. Is there a process for that?
What we do, we'll run a works program through our modelling, and it will produce a program of places. Essentially, the model tells you where to go and look. A model is just, I guess, a facsimile of what reality is. So we do a lot of field validation. Because when you're utilising the data you collect, road surface data we collect, it's segmented into 100-metre lots, and you may find that only a very small portion of that 100 metres is actually driving the actual condition. I was actually looking at some data the other day that's down to the 10-metre level, and it was interesting. It was over an area where we were looking at some potentially collapsed pipe culvert, and you could actually see that quite clearly from the 10-metre data. Right. So field validation of the data is of critical importance. The model you can use for large scale funding, for funding options back to the top management, as the Asset Management Council uses the term, to say, look, this is an indicative amount of money that we need to maintain the network at this level. But as I said, you need to understand when you build the models, well, what are the treatments? What do these treatments cost? And we'll go in and we'll build a whole series of typical treatments that we might use around our network. We'll price them up. We'll say the actual cost to do the physical task, plus the traffic management, which is becoming an increasingly larger amount of the money we spend, because obviously traffic volumes are increasing. Worker safety is a very critical issue. We've recently done some work on one of our motorways in Sydney, and the job itself was quite a simple resurfacing job, but the biggest task was actually negotiating to actually close a section of a major motorway to allow our guys to work safely. And safety, and I know this is all about pavement management, but worker safety is a critical part of what we do on a day-to-day basis, and even in our selection of our treatments. What is going to work, what can be done without someone getting hurt at the end of the day, and that all comes into the equation.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I've noticed from every podcast I've done so far, where this is a topic, is that there's always never enough money. It doesn't matter who the client is. There's always a balancing act. And as you said, over time, some things get a lot more expensive, and I doubt anything's getting cheaper to offset it. So how do you balance this? How do you optimize that spending?
Well, what the important part is when you identify is risk management. You may have a contract KPI you're working to, and there may be some sections of road that basically you're already meeting your KPI, but you have to do a risk analysis of your road network and saying, well, what risk have I? What public third-party liability risk do I have? Public impression risk. That's what's the word for that? It's reputational risk, sorry, and motorist risk. Motorcyclists we have some roads that you'd say they're low volume roads, but they get a lot of motorcyclists on the weekend, so you've got to consider all that sort of risk. So it's a prioritisation based on what is going to cause, I guess, the least disruption to the network. We know we can never do everything we need to do, so it's managing our assets to minimise our risk, our clients' risks, and public safety risk. So a lot of effort goes into looking at when we're trying to rank projects. Is yes, there's a project needs to do. What is the risk profile of that project? Okay.
So it seems like there's a lot of different risks that you've got to account for. Is it and the ones you were speaking of them were all sort of sort of physical risks? Are there any sort of broader risks that you have to account for as well?
One of the things we're starting to find now is climate change risk is a potential, is an issue we're looking at very closely. And as you've been aware, it's been a very wet sort of last 3 or 4 years in Sydney. And that really, we look at the amount of potholes we're filling, even things like third-party claims. We get seems to be every second person that runs over a pothole and gets a flat tyre thinks it's our fault, and we get lots of claims. And you can actually plot all that sort of stuff, and look at where you're potentially getting things claimed, and you can use the data from some very interesting things. We recently had a claim for a pothole on a bridge deck, and when I was looking at some of the claims, I said, hang on, we had a previous claim there. When I started going and looking at our sort of day-to-day work orders, and I saw that gee, that's interesting, we'd been to this particular location on far too many occasions to be not something wrong, and it was actually on a bridge deck. And we started looking in, and it wasn't a bridge that was controlled by our client, but there'd been a failure in some of the external post-tensioning. So looking at your data can quite often lead you into sort of, there was no safety issues associated, but it can lead you down some interesting paths. I said weather risk is an increasingly important thing, and we did a very sort of ad hoc analysis of our road payments to find them into heavy duty, medium duty and light duty. And if you look at the recent periods of where there are heavy duty payments and motorway payments, we don't get many problems. I think the worst problem we had in all the rain was some delamination and some overgraded friction course on some of our motorways, but that's 30 mil thick and it goes no further. So it's annoying, but it's not hazardous.
Yes.
Some of our lighter duty pavements that were essentially natural gravel pavements with spray seals suffered enormously in the wet weather. And we've been working with our client to, again, using this sort of risk management to try and identify these areas, and there's we're trying to sort of improve the climate resilience of some of these pavements, so we don't keep going back to them every time it rains. And again, getting back to the safety message, every time I have to have a crew out on the road filling in a pothole, that's exposing a lot of people to a high risk situation. So again, a lot of this risk analysis that we do, whether it be climate risk or general traffic risk, is associated with we've got people on the roads, and we're trying to minimise their exposure to the line of fire. Because one of the problems in road maintenance and road asset management is, you've got lots and lots of people using roads that aren't always attuned to what we're doing. And again, that is part of the risk management equation. If we can avoid, if we're sending someone to a location on, multiple occasions, that's, increasing the level of risk, and we may decide to intervene purely on the basis of, trying to keep our people safe. There's usually some road related issue, but that's all part of the risk management equation. We're trying to juggle many different needs in a risk management scenario on road asset management.
No, it's funny what you said there about how many road users aren't attuned to what you're doing. It reminded me, and it's a little bit off topic, but it reminded me about something that I heard another pavement engineer say once, and that is the wheel paths are actually moving further towards the centre of the lane because the cars are getting bigger, because SUVs are starting to get a bit bigger. Actually, sorry, they're moving further to the shoulder because cars are getting bigger. Yeah. So they're actually moving. I know that doesn't really cause too many issues with pavement management, because really the pavement is designed the same transversely. But it's an interesting thought that our pavements are being used differently, even in the most minutest ways, such as that. Yeah,
well, some of the things we've found, again associated with this wet weather, is we on a couple of our roads are getting large amounts of shallow shear failures, that's where you've got a load on the outer wheel path of the pavement, and you don't have the shoulder strength to support that load, and it just essentially it's a slip circle failure out to the side, into the shoulder of the road. And a lot of that is associated with larger vehicles. I know one of the roads I look after has had a significant increase of heavy vehicles due to some new extractive industries in the area, and trucks trying to avoid more congested roads, and that's been those sort of larger vehicles have been have done a lot of damage to roads. I once had a wise man said to me, as a contract manager I worked under many years ago, who'd come out of the oil and gas industry, and he said he'd never worked in an industry where every man and his dog seems to think he knows more about you than you do. Every person that hops behind the wheel of a car thinks they've got an opinion on how road maintenance is carried out. And we all do it. I've been accused of doing it, driving saying, well, these guys aren't doing the right thing, or I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah. We can't help it.
It just becomes it becomes second nature to look at roads when you've been in this game. And I noticed Dr. Yeaman in one of his episodes talking about his father throwing them in the car on a Sunday afternoon and driving over every road in the Blue Mountains when he was a kid. And that's what we do. We actually do get out on the roads, and actually look at things. And I've always said that to the young engineers that are part of our team. Let's go and have a look. You can't do it all from the office. And that's to understand how your network's being used and what the causes of deterioration are, and what are the improvements we can make to how we do things to reduce the level of deterioration and spend our limited budgets more effectively.
And actually, there was one other thing you said there where heavy vehicles are trying to avoid congestion. I was actually thinking about this not too long ago when I was doing a trip in going up the coast on a public holiday, which anyone who lives in Sydney that tries to attempt something like that knows it's a foolish endeavour. You just get stuck in traffic. But every couple of hours or so, Google will recommend a fantastic new way that you've never even heard of before, and you go take that. And I just wonder if a truck were to be following that, road might not have been designed for it.
I spoke to a truck driver on one of our roads and asked him why he was using that particular road. And this particular road's got some pretty torturous gradients on. I think its steepest grade's about 14% on this piece of road. I was saying, why would you want to take a heavy vehicle down that road? And he said, look, I can control my own destiny. I know where these steep sections are. I can manage, how I'm managing my vehicle to do it as efficiently as possible. He said, if I use the main highway, he said, I've got traffic lights, I've got school zones, I've got all these other things that are interfering with how I'm getting from point A to point B. And a transport operator it's time is money. It's the least amount of time on the length of their journey to to deliver whatever goods they are. So they will always take the most efficient route. we may not like it because, say, our roads aren't designed for it, but they're public roads, and that's unfortunately it's all part of the asset management of your network, is understanding, what's happening to these roads and why and how they're being used.
I mean, well, that segues pretty brilliantly into what my next question is, and that is, over the last 30 or so years, how has things like increasing traffic and differing patterns of road use, how has that affected the network that you tender?
Well, it's really interesting, and I thought about this question when it was first posed to me, and I was saying, if you look going back, I guess the late 80s, early 1990s, we were just contractors. And we'd go and do a job, we try to do it as quickly as possible, and we say, right, we've got a defects liability period. As long as we can get through our defects liability period, we'll be right. And the asset management was someone else's problem. And the science of asset management didn't really exist
not really.
30 years ago. Yeah. And it's evolved now where we've gone from being maintenance contractors to asset managers or asset stewards. So we're thinking more about, well, what have we got to do? And really, as I said, the start of this was the first of these performance-based contracts that came to market in 1995, and that was, as I said, associated with Dr. John, and he spoke about his green worm, which was basically how we modelled the network and how we thought it would perform over the term of the contract. So that was where the evolution, I guess, started of taking a different approach. We've gone away from what are we going to do to get this job quickly and get out, is, well, what is our least cost over a term of a contract? And our clients become much more sophisticated. They're now looking at the asset management space, and it's being driven from treasuries or private companies' treasuries of saying you need to demonstrate that you're spending your money in the most optimal fashion. So the science has really evolved into, we're now looking at the long-term position rather than what can we do tomorrow. It's more like we're not worrying about where our next meal's coming from. It's looking what the long-term meal plan is. And as I said, I've got to hand a lot of this to Dr. John Yeaman. He, I guess, started that thought process with people back in the early 90s. And as I said, that's where I working with John, got to understand that a lot better, and we've certainly changed how we approach things. We're much more sophisticated. We understand the asset management space. We always sort of knew it was there. It wasn't called asset management, but now it's asset management, and these are assets. They're public assets, and we're the stewards there to optimise their life and minimise the costs for whether they be shareholders or taxpayers.
Well, that's very, very pleasing to hear, because anyone that follows our LinkedIn will know just that's probably one of our primary messages, really, and that is asset management isn't a quick thing. It's not an easy thing, but it can be an expensive thing, at least at first. It's been a long journey, I guess, getting clients to understand that the beginning can be hard, but the ends justify the means. Very much so. And as I said, I'm actually, after this, I'm going to a function with the Asset Management Council. Oh, right.
It's certainly changed. We've presented on this at Asset Management Councils, council functions and conferences of how we're trying to optimise use of the network. It's an ongoing thing. And as I said, John Yeaman was one of the, I guess, the father of all this, particularly in Australia. And we all learned a lot under Dr. John's tutelage.
Yes, and you can still see much of what he did back then is still, as we spoke earlier, is still in use today in some form or another.
He was a bit of a character, is Dr. Yeaman, and I remember. When we what was called the PSMC that John spoke about in the previous podcast, and the green worm, and we actually had some structural KPIs. And I remember a colleague, Mike Mannion, who now lives in New Zealand, I was sort of thinking, well, how'd you work that out? And John sort of smiling and looking at it, so I think you two will work it out eventually. And after a period of time, we actually did, and we actually realised that these become statistical problems, and we still had to do the work, but it was how you managed your network using statistics. And again, was part of the asset management science, is to actually work out how you manage these KPIs. And at the end of that contract, we actually met the KPIs that were set for us. And a lot of that it was an interesting contract, the first contract. We actually proposed the KPIs using payment modelling to our client. And they were they were aware of it, and they were very happy to proceed with it. And we were able to demonstrate that using the right tools and going about things the right way, you can actually achieve these sorts of KPIs over long periods of time.
Okay.
It's sort of very, very interesting. But one of the interesting things, if you actually look at a lot of major road maintenance contracts in Australia and New Zealand, there's a lot of people involved that were either part of PMS or part of the company I started with, Transfield, on the original contract in the 90s. All three of the SRAP contracts in Sydney have people that were involved in that contract. The tunnel contracts, most of the tunnel contracts in Sydney have someone that came out of those contracts. PMS were operating in New Zealand. There's people in New Zealand, both in Transit New Zealand and the contractors. So it's been very, very much a nursery for developing the current group of payment asset managers that are out there. Was the original performance contract that was supported by Payment Management Services in the 1990s.
Yeah, a very, very wide influence indeed.
Yeah.
I think we're starting to run out of time, but there was one thing I wanted to ask you, and that is if you had any project that is sort of your magnum opus, the most challenging one you've done, what would that be? What were your experiences?
Well, I think the original PSMC was the one that was the contract, because it was the first of its kind. At the time in 1995 when the contract started, it was certainly the first in Australasia, but it was the biggest contract of its type in the world, and there was a lot of interest expressed around the world. I remember at the time we had visits from the Norwegian Roads Authority. We said we had, through John Yeaman organising, people like Carl Monosmith from Caltech, Ralph House from Windsor University, Martin Snape from Birmingham, making a trip to Australia to actually come and talk to us and see what was going on.
Right.
Road maintenance contracting in Western Australia grew out of the PSMC. And there's all the contracts have different types. You could probably look back at that contract and say the KPIs are fairly simple, but at the time, they were groundbreaking. And as I said to you, we looked at some of the KPIs as the team coming in to deliver and saying, well, gee, who worked this out and why did they work it out this way? But we got there and we achieved it. All contracts are a challenge because the rules get tightened.
Yes, it's like beating a high score.
Yeah, sort of. You're always sort of got to lift your game to the next one, because there's always someone out there, a competitor that wants to, they want the contract and they're prepared to sort of offer something a little bit different. It's just, so every contract's a challenge, but I have to go back to the first of these performance-based contracts to say that was where the science of asset management, particularly in Australia for road maintenance, really sort of took off. There's a lot of guys that in the road authorities that are sitting, in their head offices doing a lot of this modelling and trying to use predictions to work out what funding they're going to need in the future. But to actually have a contract that lived or died on the basis of the optimisation models and the asset management science was, to me, was groundbreaking. But
Okay.
I work on a contract today, and it's an exciting contract, and I love being part of it.
Fantastic. Alrighty. Well, thank you very much for coming down, Jim. You're welcome anytime. I think you like the office as well, so we might see you again.
Well, now I know where you are. Yeah.
Well, anyway, thank you everyone else for listening as well. Please leave a comment below, and if you want to subscribe, you may. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Castbox. We'll see you again on the next one.